Why cities? Well, it's well known that global climate change is very related to poverty. And we know that Africa in general, there are about 700 million people globally that are still in poverty that we need to pull out of poverty and not get them more into poverty. So addressing decarbonization, addressing carbon emission through deep decarbonization will help us solve that issue of global warming and climate change. So that is why I'm interested in this. And I know as we continue in this discussion through the Q&A session, I'll be able to elaborate more on that. Thank you, Professor Clarke.
Thanks, Boyle. So some concluding thoughts. Just so you know, we were asked to keep this presentation short, and thus more opportunities will come in the Q&A to go deeper if you're interested in particular aspects of it or other parts of my work. But in conclusion, the collaborative governance structure is critical for sustainability and climate progress. In other words, how you design your partnership is going to matter for actually achieving your sustainability and climate goals. There was great uptake of local Agenda 21s and equivalent in the past 25 years, and it's still a good integrated approach for localizing the Sustainable Development Goals through partnerships. And I'll also say, now that we're getting much deeper into the net zero work, it's providing a really good way to have a target and then to use that to provide direction to how you design your sustainable development strategy and the pathways needed. But partnerships are also key to climate action as well. So I'll end there. If you're interested in our research, we do have a website and you can find out more there, and my contact information is there, more information about Boyo there as well. So thank you.
Fantastic work. Thank you two very much. Thank you very, very much. Okay, I'd like to begin now with the question and answer period. Okay, again, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, if you're interested in asking a question, please raise your hand or type your question into the chat box, and then we will call on you, unmute your screen so that you can ask your question. Or if you prefer, if it's in the chat box, I can always ask. But as I was listening to the presentation, one thing came to mind that jumped out on me. Actually, there were a lot of very interesting details. This is really fantastic research. It can have a big impact on sustainable development, progress, and the actualization of the SDGs going forward. So it's really great work. I want to commend the two of you. But one thing that I thought about really quickly is you mentioned, Dr. Clarke, that you have some of these multi-stakeholder group projects are either voluntarily put together or they are contract based. And I was wondering if in your conclusions, in your findings, did you find that one or the other is more successful, or was that something that you weren't necessarily looking at?
So what we're finding is that at the local scale, they're all relevant. Mm-hmm. And so then it's a question for what? So generally, organizations get involved with a partnership approach because they want to tackle something that's outside their jurisdiction, or they don't have the resources to do it. And so that drives them to want to partner with someone else. So if the main resource you're missing is capital, you don't have the money to do an infrastructure project, for example, then a PPP might be the right approach. On the other hand, if you're missing kind of collective action by many actors simultaneously, and you want to move forward on a lot of aspects because these are very complicated problems, then a multi-stakeholder kind of cross-sector partnership will enable you to engage many actors from local universities to local businesses to civil society to all collectively work towards the same vision. So each one has a purpose. And what we're seeing in the climate space is now there's a lot of sector approaches. So they're starting to develop partnerships very specific on transportation, for example. And then another one over here on electricity. So again, it depends on what you're missing, right? How much do you control the local utilities, or it's another company? How much needs to be done through partnership, or how much you can do yourself?
Yes, interesting. I asked that question because in some of my research, I've looked at voluntary governance mechanisms in the mining sector. And again, in the literature, there's a lot of talk about the effectiveness or sometimes lack thereof on those. So I was just kind of wondering about your perspective on the sustainability front.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up mining. So
Yes.
this is a perfect example of a participation approach versus a partnership approach, right? And if you're doing stakeholder engagement, but you completely control all the decisions and you're going to completely implement all the decisions, then that's not collaborative, right? Where if it's a partnership approach where you let the community have a big say in what's happening here, then you're starting to get into a more partnership approach.
Right. I appreciate that distinction. I think that's a major distinction that really needs to be highlighted, because so often you see these PPPs, these public-private partnerships, et cetera, or you see these, governance initiatives that are supposed to be multi-stakeholder, yet while the civil society may be invited, their voices aren't always, they're not always heard. So, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, we are starting to pile up with a few questions, which is really great. Here is, well, several questions. We have a question from Namarata Takamanaka, and this person is asking, what is the role of academic institutions in these such partnerships?
Excellent question. I've seen them play many roles. So from initiating sometimes a community-wide sustainability partnership, and then pulling in the other actors and helping bring that common vision, to playing more of a support role in terms of research, or if it's initiated by someone else, typically universities will take on implementation in relation to their own operations, because you have a large campus that already has impact just through its own operations. So by addressing its efforts internally, whether that's with the land or the buildings or their fleet, if they have cars or vehicles, with the food they offer on campus, there's a role there. And then there's a role, of course, through their teaching and their research and their service. So it depends on who the lead is on a cross-sector partnership, but academic institutions are always involved as one of the partners in a community sustainability partnership.
Fantastic, great. Okay, let's see. So let me ask Dr. Clarke again. Why have you decided to focus your research on multi-stakeholder partnerships? So before we get too much further into the milieu of your work, why is it that you focus on these sort of partnerships? And then a follow-up, what is it about this political arrangement that makes it suitable for addressing these global issues, environmental issues, sustainability issues, et cetera? Please speak to some of the more prominent debates and issues in developments in the field of sustainable environment studies.
Super. So how did I come to study this? Well, as you probably heard from my introduction, I've been thinking about environment and sustainability topics for a really long time, since 1989. And therefore, I have watched as essentially things have gotten worse in many ways. There are places where it's gotten better. And what I saw is some really good policies being created, some really good plans being created at all different scales. So by local governments, but also at the UN level. But where it all fell down was always in the implementation. And that brought me to a real interest in strategy implementation, which is why I chose to focus my PhD there. But then when we think about whether it's sustainability or climate or any number of these complex issues, they're too complicated for any one organization to deal with it alone. And so that brought me into thinking about, well, what we need is partnerships and collaborative approaches to address these complex topics. But the design of the partnership is key. And that's, as a strategy scholar, kind of structure in the implementation is key to succeeding in achieving your strategy goals. So That's a kind of a long answer to tell you I got there because I care, and I figured this is the place I could have the most impact on practice.
Right. I would argue that you do have a great topic that really can have, serious impact on these issues. And again, when we think about international relations, when we think about political science, very often the tradition has always been state-centric, right? And you can see since the 1980s how we've seen more of these partnerships and these multi-stakeholder initiatives, et cetera, because, as the state kind of stepped back in the era of neoliberalism, there were gaps in governance, right? So NGOs and community groups started to, fill these gaps, and corporations took more initiative in terms of governance of their sectors and these sort of things. So I think your work on the specifics to the design of the initiative really has relevance for these sort of projects going forward. So I'm really pleased to see this is the work you're doing.
So you had a three-part question in there.
Yes.
Let me just take the third part about the field.
Sure.
So I focus on this from the management side, right, which is essentially the business literature. Mm-hmm. And you particularly focused on it from the kind of public governance and the gaps. But right. From the literature I work with, mostly it's coming out of the business literature. And why would we partner? Why would we have multi-stakeholder initiatives to address our own rules? Mm-hmm. Or why would we partner across sectors? And it's the same logic for the most part. It's they see gaps, and in certain jurisdictions, they don't see the government doing enough, so they feel like they need to step in some. But with these larger partnerships, they're engaging because of that whole list I gave you, but also because they care about seeing progress on various sustainable development elements. So the research in the space, though, I mostly focus on structure and design, but I definitely have some colleagues who are focused on questions of power, right? Who has power in the partnership? Who has legitimacy? Where is the equity here? Whose voice gets heard? So while that's not my research, it's core research that's happening in the partnership space.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. We have another question here coming from Varshna Nitish. And this person asks, when it comes to civil society and government partnerships, how do we tackle the issue of incoherence between the wants of the local communities and the government? This might go to the structure of these initiatives, right? An example that they mentioned, examples of this could be a development project that might lead to displacement of local communities, or projects that could lead to the loss of traditional sources of livelihood. So they might be talking about negotiation methodologies or something like that. What do you think?
So not all partnerships are designed well. Let me just start there. And they don't necessarily have all the local actors involved in creating the shared vision. So it sounds like the example you're giving is a story where the government and perhaps business came up with a plan where they didn't necessarily engage the local other actors, the civil society. I see this less when the local government is involved. They're closer to the people. So we see this more when it's coming from a higher level of government. But with a good design on the partnership, then you've built in a mechanism for local people and consideration of different elements and different needs in the story, so that it's a kind of co-created solution, which typically means that it's a better solution.
Fantastic. Okay, I'd like to give Dr. Clarke a moment to relax. You've been working pretty hard. So I was going to offer a question to Bio, if you'd like. We have a question here. And I'd like to ask Bio, why do you want to study this deep decarbonization pathways in Africa? And just to preface your answer, could you please inform our audience about what is deep decarbonization, please?
Thank you. So deep decarbonization is, simply put, is reducing carbon emission to the barest minimum. Is that going to happen in the next 5 years? No. But how can we make that happen soonest to ensure that the looming environmental catastrophe is averted? That is what deep decarbonization is all about. We are looking at economic ways, technological ways, and political or policy strategies to make sure that happen very soon. That is what deep decarbonization is all about.
Okay.
And to the second part of the question, why am I interested in this? I am interested in this because of a little bit of my background, a little bit of my work experience, and a little bit of my passion to ensure that we pull people out of poverty. Because again, and this might sound strange to people, but climate change is seen as the major uh, hurdle to cross to lift people out of poverty, especially in developing nations. And why is that so? Take, for example, in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, millions and millions of people depend on small-scale agricultural product to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they going to go when all those climate change start affecting their products?
Sure.
We all know infrastructural development in developing nations is not as great as the as developed nations. There's a lot of urban fragility in developing nations, and mostly that is caused by carbon emissions because of lack of strategies for sustainable development. And that is why we're looking into all this. We're looking at it into policies. We're looking at the technological approaches, transportation, electricity, and so on and so forth, to see how we can reduce, how we can support and cities and government in implementing the needed policies to reduce emission. That is why I'm interested in this, and that's the goal of this research at this point.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to kind of synthesize a few questions that I see, and I'm going to start with bio, and then perhaps Dr. Clarke can fill in. But people are asking questions about the challenges that these partnerships face, and the challenges in different contexts. Some people are mentioning India, other people are mentioning sub-Saharan Africa, etc. So bio, it's very interesting to see the discussion in Africa that there's a real priority to supply people with electricity and reliable electricity across the continent. And as you know, there's a lot of nascent oil and natural gas sectors opening up, in particular in East Africa, but really across the country. And in one of the debates in the literature is talking about these stranded assets. As we are trying to find these decarbonized pathways in the use renewable energies, a lot of these countries may lose revenues, these stranded assets, leaving oil, natural gas, et cetera, in the ground. Beside that, or if you wanted to speak to that, please, could you tell us a little bit about the challenges that African stakeholders have to achieving this decarbonized economy?
Thank you. I agree with you when you look at nations like Nigeria and now maybe Angola, Ghana now, they are mono economic countries. They depend mostly on oil for internal, for their GDP, for revenue. However, in the last 10 years, when you look at places like in the US, renewable energy sector have created over, I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but thousands and thousands and tons of jobs.
Sure.
Which means if we move from fossil-based fuel or energy resources to renewable energy, we can transfer those job loss in those sector. We can transfer them to the renewable sector. So there is no. I know people are concerned that, oh, now we're going to lose our source of revenue, the jobs, but jobs will, on the other hand, will be created. And secondly, when you look at the levelized cost of energy of solar panel, for example, that is going down, that gives us access to more people. And we've seen that all over sub-Saharan Africa. The rural energy electrification projects in Nigeria, where they're electrifying universities with solar panel. That has never happened. I studied in Nigeria, right? I know I know what the universities are, how the issues of electricity are in those countries, but those are solved now. People can go to university, study very well, not concerned about access to electricity. So yes, we might take off the oil revenue, but this process of decarbonization, moving to renewable energy, is going to create new source of revenue to the people, which will be safer for the people, which will which will also be safer to the environment. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Yeah, great answer, Bio. Thank you very much. Very informative. And then over to Dr. Clarke, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read this. This is from Dr. Georgina Arafeta, and she's asking you, Professor Clarke, please share with us some of the challenges that you have faced in the beginning stages while trying to launch private partnerships approaches toward climate change mitigation and the SDGs attainment, aside from funding issues.
Okay. So first, let me say that it hasn't been me doing this. So I study other people who are really working hard at this. In general, SDGs have taken off in different ways in different countries around the world. So I'll just say that in Canada in particular, there's a very weak understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's an understanding of sustainability to a certain extent, but right now our language is all climate. So, and then on the flip side, there's a strong interest in social equity. But the two worlds haven't necessarily come together as they do under sustainable development, where we're thinking about both at the same time. So one of the challenges is just a general understanding of the potential of the concept and of the potential to leverage the SDGs as a mechanism to think about. George, I see a note saying no sound anymore. Can you still hear me, Jason?
I can hear you, no problem, yes.
Okay, super. So I'll keep going then. The other, but more generally, the challenge besides funding, and that's a big one, is there's still a lack of awareness around that, which I brought up. Mm-hmm. There's some incumbents who really have an interest in maintaining the status quo, which speaks to your previous question around the difficulty of a transformation of our economy to deep decarbonization.
Right.
And then I'm finding at the local scale, there's a lack of understanding on how to do partnerships well. So there's a confluence of, like, people confuse the participation approach with the partnership approach and don't quite know how to engage partners and collaborate and achieve the potential that's needed to address these complex problems. So yeah, lots of challenges, political will being another one.
Right. And then also I'm sure market mechanisms get in the way as well. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. Here we have a question asking, what are some of the more prominent partnerships or some multi-stakeholder partnerships that you are looking at? And then also this question from Leela Marcel, you mentioned that partnerships with 50 plus partners give us the most hope. Do you also think that there is potential for these partnerships to have a low engagement or a potential inaction due to the number of actors? So please tell us about some of the more successful programs, and then let us know, what you think about that last part about the size of the partnerships.
Super. So let me pick two different scales. So I mentioned Barcelona was one of our cases, which is in Spain. It has more than 1,000 partners, right? That's getting into a lot of partners. Now, about half of those are actually schools who are individually signed up, but the other half are businesses, universities, different public institutions that are run on their own, and civil society organizations. So what I love about their model and Montreal's model is they've really have a mechanism to make and ensure that the partners commit to implementing internally within their own organization. So in Barcelona, they've set it up so that each organization has a local strategy for themselves, a sustainability, and that they're committing to action. And then they've also set up kind of sector approaches to help with the learning that's needed. It's just fascinating to get that level of collective action. So do they have some inactive partners? Yes. But they also have a really good design. So Montreal, the same thing, has a really good design where they have once a year, they get their partners to recommit to what actions they're going to work on in the coming year. So all kind of 300 partners are committing to at least 3 actions. And then there's a check-in a year later. What have you achieved? How far along are you? What are your commitments for the following year? So it just helps kind of keep that momentum going. And in their case, there's no inactive partners. If someone's inactive, they drop them off the list so that they can't have the kind of reputational gains of being part of this collective action. So otherwise, I would say at a completely different scale, something like the Forest Stewardship Council is considered a multi-stakeholder initiative. So that's an initiative to address forest deforestation, but at the same time ensure that the forest products we are getting are harvested in a sustainable way. And it's a really neat model where they actually took it ecosystem by ecosystem to determine what does sustainable forestry look like in this type of forest, and then built in whole ways of creating a certification scheme around that. But it's multi-stakeholder. So the civil society, the big global environmental groups were involved in creating that, as were the big forestry companies. And they helped set a standard that's completely voluntary. So companies are opting into that because they want that logo. They want to be certified by a third party to say, look, we've followed a sustainable harvest process and or recycled materials. Now they're into all kinds of different forest products and wood products and paper products now. But I'm just giving a couple of examples of where these big initiatives have worked really well in moving collective action, all in a voluntary way.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm seeing a few questions for bio. I'm going to start with one here, and then perhaps there'll be a second one right behind that, okay? So bio, please, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of multi-stakeholder partnerships being implemented in Nigeria, more broadly in the African context? And when we talk about more broadly in the African context, I'm going to reference Candice Najorj. Her question, she is asking you, what can African governments, African governments may continue to ignore environmental needs, such as reducing deep carbonation for infrastructure development. She references Kenya and its road development in partnership with China, which has caused major deforestation in the capital. Therefore, how could African government, do a better job of governing these issues? So again, just very briefly, just let me summarize that again. What are the strengths and weaknesses of these multi-stakeholder partnerships in Nigeria? And then could you speak to other places, other instances on the African continent, perhaps this Kenyan example?
And let me just say, Boyo, it's okay to say this is out of your knowledge base,
Certainly.
that you are unable to answer this if you feel that's the case.
Thank you for jumping in on that, Professor Clarke. Yeah, but I think I can say something about this. Then I will turn it over to you to give maybe more detail. So let me put a very an experience that I had. I worked a couple of years uh, in the power generation industry. I worked all over a lot of sub-Saharan African countries. And I was working on this project where it's a partnership between uh, different global organization, national government, and private enterprises to build a power plant.
Mm.
This is a gas-fired power plant, which is situated close to location of gas infrastructure. Now that's a partnership. Let's build a power plant so that we can get electricity to the hospitals, schools, and so on and so forth. In the process of bringing the equipment to the project site, the bridge does not have the strength to take the weight of the equipment. And why am I saying this? Infrastructure is a major problem to partnership in developing nations. You are trying to solve one problem, which in this case, we're trying to solve the problem of electricity, but we completely overlook access to that site, road infrastructure. So one of the challenges in developing nation that I know is that we have to look at multitude of uh, of actions and processes to solve one in our partnership. Right, we need to look at everything. We need to have a 360 degrees look around to ensure that every part of that plan is taken care of, because in developing nations, the infrastructure is fragile. So that's my answer on that. I don't know, Professor Clarke, if you want to jump in on that.
No, it was super.
Oh, fantastic. Really, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, as we're just about rounding out the hour, I'd like to just finish up with just a couple more questions, 2 or 3 more questions, and then I can give you a little summary. But let me see. Dr. Clarke, we saw in your bio that you also have experience promoting sustainability on campuses in local communities. I was wondering, before the hour ends, I was wondering if you could speak to our audience about how university students and community members might be able to get involved in promoting sustainability in their own local areas.
Super. So let me first comment on what you can do with your campus, and then what you can do as an individual. But when I first arrived here at University of Waterloo, and this isn't specific to students, it's for faculty or anybody else who's listening that's involved with the university. But there was no multi-stakeholder committee here. There was no sustainability policy. There was no sustainability strategy. And remember, I'm a strategy prof. So I'm thinking about this from how do we institutionalize sustainability so that the university is committed to it, and so that it will continue to implement it even if I'm not here. And then it's not on the students to try and carry it on the side. So for many years, even long before I was professor, I've worked on this kind of how do we institutionalize campus sustainability? And the first movements in Canada were led by students. So where the students started was by doing assessments to say, well, where are we at? How much waste do we generate? How much greenhouse gases do we generate? What is the situation on our campus? And doing that sustainability report first. And then from there, asking for a staff person to be responsible, and from there getting that multi-stakeholder committee, and ultimately a strategy put, like the university committing to it with a policy, and then a strategy for implementation. Now, we have that all now on my campus. And under that is where we've committed to carbon neutrality, and now we have a plan to reach carbon neutrality on campus, etc. But I can just say, whatever role you play in the university, there are opportunities to kind of push the institutionalization of this, either from the student side or from a faculty member or employee side. So that would be my first recommendation. Take the long run, see what can be done to build it into the institution itself. Now, if I can talk about individuals, because I've done a lot of work on youth and innovation as well. My advice usually to young people is to think about your sphere of influence. So what is it you care about? Is it climate change? Is it poverty reduction? Is it plastics? It might be a whole mix of things that you care about and that you want to see change on. So start with yourself. Because you absolutely have influence over yourself. So start with your choices, your consumer choices, your voting choices. It's your behavior. All of this you can control. So then, who can you influence? Where's your sphere of influence? Probably your friends are next, your family, perhaps coworkers if you're working. Then you can go, well, where's my next sphere of influence? This is where we start to get into organization. So maybe it's your school, your workplace, your religious institution. And then from there, if you're really wanting to create change in the system, you can take it to your sector, your community, and then really to government policy. And I've seen young people get all the way to government policy on that sphere of influence, and not alone, right? You start joining movements, you start joining other people. But really, I say start with where you are, start with yourself.
Fantastic. Great. I appreciate it. Okay, so we are just reaching the 3 o'clock hour. We have one new message. Let me just see what we've got here. Okay, that's just a thank you. Yes, I'd just like to have a quick summary. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Amelia Clarke and Bio Akamalafe for coming to our green room discussion today. Today, we talked about multi-stakeholder partnerships, at different levels, looking at how they interact between the global issues and local development and implementation. Implementation on sustainable environmental and sustainable development goals. One of the things that I want you to take away is the research that Dr. Clarke is doing is really bearing out that when we have these partnerships, there are endless types of configurations, endless numbers of partners. However, the design is really important. It's essential to have checks and balances, and it's essential to have accountability measures as well. This way, you don't end up with this free rider sort of phenomena where members of the group get to have the reputational accolades and benefits from being associated and being a member. However, they aren't actually implementing in the way that they should. Okay. Do either of you have any last words or comments?
Really, just a thank you to you, Jason, and the team at the Green Institute. It's you're providing a great service here for, well, not related to me, but more generally, providing the opportunity through your Green Room series for people to listen to different speakers. So thank you for creating this opportunity.
On behalf of the Green Room team, I really do appreciate that compliment. Thanks so much. Bio, any last words just to thank our audience?
Yeah, once again, thank you for having me here. Thank you to all the audience for joining in and listening in. We appreciate what you're doing, Jason, and your team, and thank you for having us today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And again, ladies and gentlemen, please take note of the Green Room. You can follow us on Twitter. You can find our videos on YouTube, also on Facebook. Our website is thegreeninstitute.ng, where you can see upcoming events and other aspects and features of the Green Institute and the Green Room program in particular. We have another Green Room coming to you next month, so please keep an eye out for our website and our social media pages to find out when that is and who we will be discussing. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming. Have a great weekend. Enjoy. Tomorrow is the spring equinox. Happy spring. Thank you very much. Best wishes, everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.